We're talking to Dr. JBaxter, who is giving us information relative to Africans in public education, African Americans in public education. And we're now talking about the so-named historical black institutions of higher education, or more specifically, historical black colleges. And of course, Dr. Baxter, let's start off again by dealing finally with the HBCs and moving forward in reference to African Americans in public education.
All right, Dr. Haney, when we go back and we look at the post-antebellum period, that period after the Civil War, that period referred to as Reconstruction, we see then the black historical colleges being established. Not only that, we see the Reconstruction period in the last phase. But one thing we must remember, even though blacks were beginning to read and write, we also must remember that out of that Reconstruction period came what we refer to as the Negro Amendments, the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendment, along with the ongoing education of the freedmen and schools being established by newly established black churches, along with the northern missionaries coming south. We must understand the greatest achievement that came out of the Reconstruction period and would be the launching pad for us as a people at the turn of the 20th century would be that of the right to vote. It would be that of education, which has always been our ticket to the promised land. We must also remember that because of the education that we received, it enabled us to move forward as it relates to the well-meaning of economics. Well, as Reconstruction began to come to an end, we must understand at the close of Reconstruction, which officially ends in the year 1877, with the election by way of the Compromise of 1876, with the election in the House of Representatives of Rutherford B. Hayes as President of the United States of America. The last of the federal troops were pulled out of the South. Well, what does this mean? It means simply this: the federal government abandoned the Negro or the freedmen in the South and left over 3.5 million plus people of color at the disposal, at the mercy of the redeeming Democrats. These were the ex-Confederates that had control of their state governments before the Civil War. These are the ex-Confederate officials who were disenfranchised because of their involvement in the Confederate government, which withdrew from these United States of America. Now they are back in control of their state governments as redeemers. And what they will do is to take away all of the strides of freedoms, all of the rights, all of the things that were accomplished during the Reconstruction period. Their goal was to take us back to where we once were, okay? Now, so we're in this period where people of color are being subjected. They're being terrorized by the Ku Klux Klan. They're being terrorized by other vigilante groups. New voting rights are new voting laws are being imposed. Now we have the grandfather clause. Now we have the poll tax. Now we have the literacy test. And eventually, we find ourselves with no black politicians at the local level, the state level, the federal level. So then it's open season now for Southerners to turn back the clock and place people of color back where they were before the war. It was not a physical slavery, but it was a mental slavery. We were set back from an economic point of view. Well, now we come up to the year 1896. Homer Plessy. His case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Homer Plessy made what white Southerners would call a major mistake. He wanted to be seated in a boxcar that was restricted to him because of the color of his skin. His case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that separate but equal was constitutional. Well, that gives rise then to what becomes known as the Jim Crow era.
All right.
Now, after 1896, what we then have in America, two distinct worlds, one black and one white. It gives rise then to the color theater, the white theater, the colored water fountain, the white water fountain, the color park, the white park, the colored school. And let's stop at the colored school because they were separate, but they were not equal. I remember growing up in the old city of Nashville, I attended the Wharton School. And at the old Wharton School, my first grade classroom was in the basement. When it rained on us in the basement. There were those cold winter mornings where there was no coal for the furnace. We sat there in our coats, and if we blowed our breath,
you could see it
we could see our breath. But we still learned, even though we received the second class, the hand-me-down textbooks that they didn't want and had used and abused. When they got the new ones, we got the old ones. But Dr. Haney, I served notice today that it did not stop us from excelling and learning because we had Negro educators who knew the importance of education and who realized that it was our meal ticket, it was our ticket to the promised land. So even though we were being taught in adverse situations, they were determined that we were going to get a quality education because they knew that a mind
is a terrible thing
to waste.
Now, over the last 3 minutes, when you look at the African American public education today, what do you find? Has the advent of President Obama has that done anything to help elevate higher education among Africans? What do you think the situation is?
Obama has made a great stride in improving quality education in America across the board. Across the board. He calls it race to the top. The Obama administration here in our native great state of Tennessee, we were awarded $800 million here in Tennessee to improve quality education all across the state. But Dr. Haney, we must understand it's good to have the money. But sometimes throwing money at a situation does not mean you have solved the problem. See, I have a problem sometimes when we take good money and throw it after bad money or throw it in the wind. Now, what I'm saying then with that, we do need the $800 million. But is the $800 million really being trickled down to those who really need the money in order to elevate and move forward with their future? Well, what is happening then in public education? The poor, and especially African American students, and I want to emphasize African American males, we are being miseducated. See, it's one thing to be under the same roof with majority people, but I can be under the same roof and still be what? Miseducated. When I'm being taught by people who does not like me, who does not have any compassion or love for me, people who teach at me and not to me, people who does not understand my subculture, not trying to understand, people who misunderstand the goal of public education. That's why it's called public education. We educate everybody. And by the way, public education was an achievement, or was a system that came out of the Reconstruction period. We must understand that we educate everybody. But when we look at public education today, and especially in Tennessee, we have what they call magnet schools.
Okay, well, let's stop here,
Okay.
Dr. Baxter, because I think we're just about running out of time.
All right.
And I appreciate your passion.
Very good.
But we're just about out of time. And let
Okay.
us encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.